March 17, 1943, 2:47 a.m., the North Atlantic Ocean. Kapitän Lieutenant Heinrich Bruns adjusts his periscope, scanning the horizon through the pre-dawn darkness. His U-boat U-175 has been stalking this Allied convoy for 6 hours, 42 fat merchant ships crawling across the ocean at just 8 knots. In his previous patrols, this would be what they called a happy time. Easy targets, minimal escorts, turkey shoot. But tonight something feels wrong. Through his periscope, Bruns counts the escort ships circling the convoy. 1 destroyer, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, 14 warships. His executive officer whispers nervously, "Herr Kapitän, that's too many." Bruns has never seen a convoy with this many escorts, and several of these ships, smaller, boxier vessels, he doesn't even recognize. They're not destroyers. They're not corvettes. What are they? He's about to find out, and it will cost him his boat, his crew, and nearly his life. Those mysterious ships were America's secret weapon, Destroyer Escorts. And in the next 12 months, they would transform the Battle of the Atlantic from Germany's greatest success into its most catastrophic defeat. This is the story of how a ship most people have never heard of saved Britain from starvation, made D-Day possible, and terrified the German U-boat fleet into submission. Welcome to the untold story of the Destroyer Escorts, the devil boats of the Atlantic. To understand why Destroyer Escorts were revolutionary, you need to understand just how badly the Allies were losing in 1942. And make no mistake, they were losing. Badly. Picture this. It's November 1942. In just that single month, German U-boats sank 119 Allied merchant ships. That's 729,160 tons of cargo sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. Nearly 4 ships destroyed every single day. But the raw numbers don't capture the horror. Imagine you're a merchant sailor on a tanker loaded with 10,000 tons of aviation fuel. It's 2 a.m. You're in the middle of the Atlantic, 800 miles from land in any direction. The convoy is traveling in complete darkness. No lights allowed because of the U-boat threat. Suddenly, a massive explosion tears through a ship 300 yards to your left. The night sky lights up like noon as the tanker erupts into a pillar of flame. You can hear men screaming as they burn alive in oil-covered water. Before you can even process what's happening, a second torpedo slams into another ship, then a third, then a fourth. The convoy erupts into chaos. Ships scatter in every direction. Burning oil spreads across the water. Men jump overboard, only to realize the ocean itself is on fire. The few escort destroyers race around desperately, dropping depth charges into the darkness. But the U-boats are already gone, slipping away at silent running speed, preparing for their next attack. By dawn, 7 ships are gone. 256 men are dead. The U-boat suffered 0 casualties. This happened over and over and over again in 1942. Let me give you the full picture of how dire things were. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank 1,664 Allied merchant ships. Read that again. 1,664 ships in 12 months. That's 7.8 million tons of shipping. Enough to fill a line of cargo trucks stretching from New York to Los Angeles and back again. Twice. The mathematics were straightforward and terrifying. Allied shipyards were building new merchant ships as fast as humanly possible. In 1942, they completed 746 new merchant vessels, a remarkable industrial achievement. But U-boats were sinking ships twice as fast as the Allies could build them. Britain was bleeding out. Food rationing became severe. Fuel stocks dropped to critical levels. The RAF began grounding aircraft because aviation fuel was running out. Ammunition factories slowed production because raw materials weren't arriving. Winston Churchill, the man who stood defiant during the Blitz, who never showed fear when German bombers attacked London, later wrote in his memoirs, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." That should tell you everything. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat force, had developed a strategy so effective that it nearly won the war by itself. He called it Rudeltaktik, the wolf pack. Here's how it worked. German intelligence would intercept Allied radio transmissions and identify when a convoy was forming. Units would position a patrol line of U-boats, sometimes 20 or more, across the convoy's expected route. When the first U-boat spotted the convoy, it wouldn't attack immediately. Instead, it would shadow the convoy while radioing the position to headquarters. Units would then vector all nearby U-boats toward that position. The U-boats would converge after sunset. They'd surface, because U-boats on the surface were faster than the merchant ships and nearly invisible in the darkness. They'd race ahead of the convoy, then dive to attack positions. Then at a coordinated time, they'd strike from multiple directions simultaneously. A typical convoy might have 40-50 merchant ships protected by just 2 or 3 destroyers. When 10 U-boats attacked at once, the math became impossible. The destroyers would race toward one U-boat, and while they were dropping depth charges, 3 other U-boats would torpedo ships on the opposite side of the convoy. And here's the truly devastating part. Experienced U-boat captains knew they didn't even need to sink the escorts. They just needed to keep them busy on one side of the convoy, while other U-boats slaughtered ships on the other side. It was a massacre. Month after month after month, the British Admiralty ran the numbers and came to a horrifying conclusion. At the current rate of losses, Britain would run out of food, fuel, and ammunition by mid-1943. They would be forced to negotiate surrender, without Germany ever landing a single soldier on British soil. The Americans understood the crisis, but they faced a terrible dilemma. Destroyers, the traditional anti-submarine warships, took 18 months to build and cost $15 million each. That's about $270 million in today's dollars. They required complex engines, sophisticated fire control systems, and highly trained crews. America was already building destroyers as fast as possible, but they needed destroyers everywhere, protecting aircraft carriers in the Pacific, screening battleships, supporting amphibious invasions, Convoy Escort in the Atlantic, defending the Panama Canal. There simply weren't enough destroyers to go around, not even close. The U.S. Navy did the math. To adequately protect Atlantic convoys, they'd need at least 300 additional destroyers. At 18 months per ship, it would be 1945 before enough ships were available. Britain would be starved into surrender long before then. Something had to change, radically and fast. In early 1942, a group of naval architects and engineers gathered in Washington with a single mission: design a ship that could hunt submarines, could be built in a fraction of the time of a destroyer, and could be produced in massive quantities. They called it the Destroyer Escort. The designation would be DE. The concept was brilliant in its practicality. Take everything non-essential off a destroyer, make it smaller, simpler, cheaper, but keep all the submarine hunting equipment. The final specifications were revolutionary. Size, 306 feet long, 36 feet wide. About 20% smaller than a destroyer, speed 24 knots maximum. Destroyers could do 35 knots, but 24 was still faster than any submerged U-boat and faster than the merchant ships they'd protect. Crew, 200 men instead of 300. Smaller ship. Fewer systems, less manpower needed. Armament. Here's where it got interesting. Less anti-aircraft and anti-ship firepower than destroyers, but equal or better anti-submarine weaponry. Each destroyer escort carried one QC sonar system, the same type used on destroyers, with a 2,500-yard detection range 8, depth charge projectors that could hurl 600-pound depth charges 150 yards, 2 depth charge, racks that could roll charges directly, off the stern one Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. Revolutionary weapon we'll discuss shortly. 200 depth charges, total. Enough to prosecute multiple submarine contacts for surface combat. They had 3 3-inch guns, adequate for fighting U-boats on the surface. Multiple 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Some classes carried 3 torpedo tubes construction time. This was the killer feature. Using prefabrication, modular construction, and streamlined systems, a destroyer escort could be built in 6 months from keel laying to commissioning. 6 months. Compared to 18 months for a destroyer, cost $6 million per ship versus $15 million for a destroyer, less than half the price. The first destroyer escort, USS Evarts DE-5, had its keel laid on October 7, 1942. It was launched on December 7th, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor. By March 1943, it was hunting U-boats in the Atlantic. But America didn't just build one. They built them by the hundreds. American shipyards went into a production frenzy that remains one of the most impressive industrial achievements in human history. Shipyards in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, all across the country, began churning out destroyer escorts using assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing. Welders worked 24-hour shifts. Components were prefabricated inland and shipped to coastal yards. Entire sections of ships were built separately and then welded together in a matter of days. The numbers are staggering. 1,843, Destroyer escorts completed 1944, 189. Destroyer escorts completed 1945, 289. Destroyer escorts completed by war's end. 563 destroyer escorts had been built in less than 4 years. That's an average of more than 1 ship every 2.5 days for 4 straight years. To put that in perspective, Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the entire war. From 1939 to 1945, America built 563 submarine hunters in just the last 3 years of the war, but sheer numbers weren't enough. These ships needed to prove they could actually kill U-boats, and they needed weapons that could do it efficiently. Enter the Hedgehog. The Hedgehog was one of the most innovative weapons of World War II, and most people have never heard of it. Traditional depth charges had a major flaw. You had to pass directly over the submarine to drop them. This meant you lost sonar, contact at the critical moment, your own propeller, noise and the sound of the charges entering. The water would deafen your sonar. You were essentially bombing. Blind, the Hedgehog solved this problem brilliantly. It was a mortar launcher, mounted on the bow of the ship. It fired 24 small projectiles, each weighing 65 pounds and carrying 35 pounds of Torpex explosive in a circular pattern 250 yards ahead of the ship. The projectiles would arc through the air and splash down in a circular pattern about 40 yards in diameter. They would sink at a predictable rate. And here's the genius part. They only exploded on contact with something solid. If they hit a submarine, boom. If they missed and hit the ocean floor, nothing. No explosion, no noise to confuse sonar. This meant the attacking ship could maintain sonar contact throughout the entire attack. If you heard an explosion, you knew you'd hit the submarine. If you heard nothing, you knew you'd missed and could immediately launch another attack. The kill rate spoke for itself. Traditional depth charges had about a 5% success rate per attack. Hedgehog attacks had a 20-25% success rate, 5 times more effective. German U-boat captains learned to fear the distinctive thump-thump-thump sound of Hedgehog projectiles splashing into the water above them. They knew that pattern meant a destroyer escort was above them, and it knew exactly where they were. But weapons alone weren't enough. The real revolution was in tactics. April 15, 1943. Convoy HX-233, 42 merchant ships crawled across the North Atlantic in neat rows, loaded with Sherman tanks, ammunition, food, and fuel desperately needed in Britain. This convoy represented millions of dollars in cargo and equipment, and the hopes of thousands of soldiers waiting for supplies. But this convoy was different from the massacre runs of 1942 escorting. The convoy were 6 British corvettes, 2 British destroyers, and 6 brand-new American destroyer escorts. USS Spencer, USS Duane, USS Greer, USS Babbitt, USS Schenck, and USS Champlain. 14 warships total. The German Wolfpack shadowing the convoy consisted of 17 U-boats. On paper, the Germans still had the advantage, but they were about to discover that the rules had changed. U-175, commanded by Kapitän-Leutnant Heinrich Bruns, the same captain we met at the beginning, had positioned itself ahead of the convoy. Bruns was a veteran U-boat commander with multiple successful patrols. He'd sunk 5 Allied ships in his career. This would be his last patrol. At 08:47 hours, Bruns brought U-175 to periscope depth to examine the convoy. He wanted to pick the perfect target, probably one of the tankers in the center of the formation. Fat, slow, and full of explosive fuel. An easy kill. He never got the chance to fire. USS Spencer, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Harold Burdine, had been pinging away with sonar as part of the screen ahead of the convoy. At 8:49 hours, the sonar operator suddenly stiffened. Contact. Bearing 045, range 200 yards. Burdine didn't hesitate. All ahead, flank. Battle stations. Spencer surged forward, its diesel engines roaring to life. The Destroyer Escort accelerated to 24 knots, charging directly toward the sonar contact. Inside U-175, the sonar operator heard the propeller sounds growing louder, rapidly louder. Destroyer, coming straight at us. High speed! Bruns's face went white. How close? 500 meters. 400. Coming fast. There was no time to dive deeper, no time to evade. The Destroyer Escort was right on top of them. Bruns screamed, "Brace for wham!" The first depth charge exploded 30 feet from U-175's hull. The shockwave hit like a gigantic hammer. Light bulbs shattered. Men were thrown to the deck. Pipes burst, spraying high-pressure water. Wham! The second charge was closer. 20 feet. The hull groaned as plates buckled. The electric motors sparked and died. The lights went out, plunging the submarine into darkness broken only by emergency lighting. Wham! The third charge was nearly a direct hit. The pressure hull cracked. Water began flooding into the aft torpedo room. Men screamed as the ocean rushed in with unstoppable force. Inside the submarine, chaos reigned. The chief engineer shouted that they were flooding in 3 compartments. The electric motors were dead. The dive planes weren't responding. The submarine was out of control, sinking toward crush depth. Bruns had one choice: surface and surrender, or die. Emergency blow. Surface! Surface! Compressed air roared into the ballast tanks, forcing water out. U-175 shot toward the surface like a cork, breaching the waves at a steep angle. The German crew began pouring out of the conning tower hatch, desperate to escape the flooding submarine. Some had their hands up. Others were too shocked to do anything but stare. Spencer's crew didn't give them a chance to fight back. Every gun on Spencer opened fire at once. The 3-inch main guns, the 40mm Bofors, the 20mm cannons, even the 50 caliber machine guns. Shells ripped into U-175's conning tower, shredding metal and flesh. Tracers ricocheted off the submarine's hull. German sailors fell, some tumbling into the ocean, others collapsing on the deck. The U-boat's deck gun crew tried to man their weapon, but they were cut down before they could load a shell. Within 3 minutes, U-175 was clearly sinking, its stern already underwater. The surviving German crew were jumping into the Atlantic, many injured, all terrified. Bruns himself stood on the conning tower bridge, and as water surged around his legs, he finally jumped. U-175 slipped beneath the waves, stern first, leaving only a swirl of oil debris. And swimming men. Spencer and the other escorts pulled 41 German survivors from the water, including Bruns, who sat on Spencer's deck in stunned silence, wrapped in a blanket, watching his submarine's final resting place marked by a spreading oil slick. One of Spencer's officers asked him, "How long were you under attack?" Bruns looked at his watch, still somehow working. From the first depth charge to his submarine sinking, 19 minutes, 19 minutes. His invincible U-boat, destroyed in less time than it takes to watch a TV sitcom, and he'd been destroyed by a type of ship he'd never even heard of until that morning. It was the first U-boat kill by an American destroyer escort, but in the next 12 months there would be 67 more. The age of the U-boat was ending. The age of the destroyer escort had begun. By summer 1943, destroyer escorts were proving their worth protecting convoys. But the U.S. Navy realized these ships were so cheap and so numerous that they could afford to try something radical. Instead of just defending convoys reactively, why not hunt U-boats proactively? Thus was born one of the most innovative tactical concepts of World War II, the Hunter-Killer Group. The concept was elegantly simple. Pair one small escort carrier with 4 to 6 destroyer escorts, and send them out specifically to hunt and kill submarines. The escort carrier, usually a small, slow carrier converted from a merchant ship hull, would carry about 24 aircraft. These planes would patrol enormous areas of ocean, searching for U-boats. When they found one, the Destroyer Escorts would race in for the kill. For German U-boat commanders, this was a paradigm shift that turned their world upside down. Previously, U-boats were the hunters. They stalked convoys, picked their moments, chose their targets, and attacked when conditions favored them. The ocean was their domain. They controlled the engagement. Now suddenly they were being hunted. Surface to recharge your batteries. Aircraft might spot you and radio your position. Run submerged. Destroyer escorts would ping away with sonar until they found you. Try to transit an area. A hunter-killer group might be patrolling that exact location. There was nowhere safe anymore. The Atlantic Ocean, once a hunting ground for U-boats, had become a killing ground for U-boats. One of the most successful hunter-killer groups was Task Group 2112, centered on the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and her screening destroyer escorts, USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Chatelain, and USS Jenks. This group, commanded by Captain Daniel Gallery, would accomplish something unprecedented in naval history. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about what it was like to be hunted. A German U-boat captain interviewed after the war described the experience. In 1942, we were the wolves. In 1944, we were the rabbits. Every time we surfaced, we expected aircraft. Every time we transmitted a radio message, we feared direction finding. When we heard sonar pinging, we knew the American destroyer escorts were near, and they would hunt us until we died or surrendered. The ocean became our grave. Another U-boat officer put it more bluntly. The Americans built ships faster than we could sink them, and they built them specifically to kill us. By 1944, leaving port on a U-boat was not a military mission. It was suicide. The statistics bear this out. In May 1943, just 1 month, 41 German U-boats were sunk. In 1 month, that was more U-boats than Germany could build to replace them. The average operational life of a U-boat dropped from multiple patrols to just 2 patrols. Experienced commanders were dying. Replacement crews were younger, less trained, more frightened. Admiral Dönitz tried everything to counter the destroyer escorts. He equipped U-boats with schnorkel systems, breathing tubes that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, recharging batteries without fully surfacing. He developed acoustic torpedoes that would home in on propeller noise, specifically designed to target escort vessels. He created special rubber coatings to absorb sonar pings, making U-boats harder to detect. None of it worked. The destroyer escorts adapted to every countermeasure. When U-boats started using schnorkels, aircraft and destroyer escorts learned to spot the distinctive wake they left. When U-boats deployed acoustic torpedoes, the escorts towed Foxer noisemakers behind them to decoy the torpedoes away, and the destroyer escorts just kept coming. More and more of them. By 1944, there were over 300 destroyer escorts in service. They were everywhere. Now, let me tell you about the greatest achievement of any hunter-killer group in the war. June 4, 1944. 2 days before D-Day. Task Group, Duriv Guadalcanal and her destroyer escorts, was hunting off the coast of West Africa. They'd been at sea for 3 weeks without a contact. Then, at 11:10 hours, an Avenger torpedo bomber from Guadalcanal spotted something. A periscope wake, cutting through the water at 8 knots. U-505. The aircraft immediately radioed the position and dropped depth charges, forcing the submarine to dive. But the pilot kept circling, dropping sonobuoys to maintain contact. Destroyer escort USS Chatelain, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Dudley Knox, was 10 miles away. He ordered, "All ahead flank. Set Hedgehog for 140-foot depth." Chatelain raced toward the contact at maximum speed. Its sonar quickly picked up the submarine. Aboard U-505, Captain Lieutenant Harold Lange heard the propeller sounds approaching. He ordered silent running and tried to evade. But Chatelain's sonar operator, a young man named Warren Howard, held the contact perfectly. At 200 yards, Commander Knox gave the order, "Fire Hedgehog!" Thump, 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 thump. 24 projectiles arced through the air and splashed into the ocean in a perfect circular pattern. Aboard U-505, the crew heard them hit the water. The sound was distinctive, Every U-boat sailor had been trained to recognize it. It meant a destroyer escort was directly above them and knew exactly where they were. The projectiles sank rapidly. Then, boom, boom, boom. 3 projectiles struck U-505's pressure hull. The explosions tore holes in the steel. High-pressure water blasted into the submarine like fire hoses. Men screamed. The lights went out. The submarine began tilting forward as water flooded the forward compartments. Lang had no choice. Emergency surface. Abandoned ship. U-505 broke through the surface at a steep angle. The crew began pouring out of the hatches, many not even bothering to grab life jackets, just desperate to escape the flooding submarine. But here's where Captain Gallery did something absolutely audacious. Instead of sinking U-505 with gunfire, Gallery ordered a boarding party to capture the submarine intact. A boarding party. From Destroyer Escort USS Pillsbury to board an enemy submarine while it was still wallowing in the waves, with its crew abandoning ship. It was insane. It was brilliant. Lieutenant Albert David led a 9-man boarding party in a small boat from Pillsbury. They raced toward U-505 while the German crew was still jumping overboard. David and his men clambered onto the submarine's slippery deck and went down the conning tower hatch into the flooding submarine. Inside U-505, water was knee-deep and rising. The emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. Somewhere below, machinery sparked and hissed. But David and his men were trained engineers and damage control experts. They located valves and closed them. They found switches and shut down systems. They worked in freezing water, in darkness, in a submarine that might sink at any moment, and they saved it. Within 30 minutes, they'd stopped the flooding. Within an hour, they'd rigged a tow line. USS Guadalcanal's task group towed U-505 over 2,500 miles to Bermuda, keeping the capture completely secret. Not even the German survivors knew the submarine hadn't sunk. They were kept isolated to prevent them from reporting its capture. The intelligence haul was extraordinary. The submarine's Enigma machine and code books, current German naval codes, operational orders showing, U-boat patrol areas, technical manuals revealing, U-boat capabilities charts showing German minefields. It was the first enemy warship captured on the high seas by the U.S. Navy since 1815. During the War of 1812, Captain I. Gallery received the Distinguished Service Medal. Lieutenant David received the Medal of Honor. Every man in the boarding party received the Navy Cross, but the real victory was the message it sent. Destroyer escorts weren't just sinking U-boats. They were capturing them. The hunters had become utterly dominant. By late 1943, the statistics told a story that was catastrophic for Germany and triumphant for the Allies. Let me walk you through the numbers, because they're staggering. 1942. U-boats sank 1,664 Allied ships while losing 87 U-boats. Nearly 20 ships sunk for every U-boat lost. Germany was winning decisively. 43. U-boats sank 597 Allied ships while losing 237 U-boats. Just 2.5 ships per U-boat. The ratio had reversed by a factor of 8. 44. U-boats sank just 132 ships while losing 241 U-boats. Germany was losing almost 2 U-boats for every ship sunk. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won, and destroyer escorts were a primary reason why. By the end of 1944, 342 destroyer escorts were in service. They were everywhere, protecting convoys, hunting in killer groups, screening larger warships, patrolling choke points. German U-boat crews began calling them Amerikaner Teufelsboote, American Devil boats. Captured U-boat officers, when interrogated, would often ask specifically about the small escort ships. How many do you have? How fast can you build them? Why are they so effective? One captured German submariner, when shown a photograph of a destroyer escort, simply shook his head and said, "These ships, they are everywhere, always. We cannot surface. We cannot attack safely. We can only hide and hope they don't find us. But they always find us." The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. In 1940-1942, volunteering for U-boat service was considered prestigious. U-boat crews were elite warriors, the gray wolves of the Atlantic, celebrated in German propaganda. By 1944, U-boat service had become a death sentence. New recruits would report to their submarines pale and terrified. Experienced crews would shake uncontrollably before leaving port. Some U-boats left Germany on patrol and simply never returned, whether they were sunk or whether the crews mutinied and surrendered was sometimes unclear. The average life expectancy of a U-boat on patrol dropped to horrifying levels. In 1944, a U-boat leaving port had roughly a 50% chance of never returning. One U-boat captain who survived the war described it. By 1944, saying goodbye to your family before a patrol felt like attending your own funeral. We all knew we were probably going to die. We went anyway because refusing meant execution. We were more afraid of the SS than of the American destroyers. At least the Americans would rescue you if you surrendered. Admiral Dönitz kept sending U-boats out anyway, partly because Hitler demanded it, partly because even a few successful attacks could disrupt Allied shipping, but mostly because withdrawing the U-boats entirely would admit defeat. So the slaughter continued. But now it was German submarines being slaughtered. Meanwhile, destroyer escorts weren't just fighting in the Atlantic. They were deployed globally. In the Pacific, destroyer escorts hunted Japanese submarines and protected amphibious invasions. USS England, which we'll discuss shortly, became legendary in the Pacific. In the Mediterranean, destroyer escorts escorted convoys supplying the Italian and southern France campaigns. Some destroyer escorts were even transferred to Britain and other Allied navies under Lend-Lease, spreading their effectiveness even further. The impact on the broader war was profound. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, was only possible because the Battle of the Atlantic had been won. The invasion required moving millions of tons of supplies and hundreds of thousands of troops across the Atlantic. In 1942, such an invasion would have been impossible. U-boats would have devastated the buildup of forces in Britain. In 1944, thanks largely to destroyer escorts, the buildup proceeded unmolested. The supplies arrived, the troops arrived, the invasion succeeded. Every soldier who stormed Omaha Beach, every paratrooper who jumped into Normandy, every tank that rolled through France, they were all there because destroyer escorts had defeated the U-boats. But the destroyer escorts weren't done making history. Some destroyer escorts became legendary. Let me tell you about three of them. USS England, DE 635. This ship holds a record that will likely never be broken in naval warfare. In May 1944, USS England was operating in the Pacific as part of an anti-submarine hunter-killer group. Japanese submarines were attempting to establish a reconnaissance line to detect American forces preparing for the invasion of the Mariana Islands. Between May 19th and May 31st, just 12 days, England detected and sank 6 Japanese submarines. 6. In 12 days, Ika-16 sunk. May 19th with Hedgehog attack. Row 106 sunk May 22nd with Hedgehog attack. Row 104 sunk May 23rd with Hedgehog attack. Row 116 sunk May 24th with Hedgehog attack. RO 108 sunk May 26th with Hedgehog attack. RO 105 sunk May 31st with Hedgehog attack. Every single kill was made with the Hedgehog weapon system. The crew became so proficient that they could detect, track, attack, and sink a submarine in less than 30 minutes. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commander of the U.S. Third Fleet, sent a message to England's captain. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The chief of naval operations in Washington reportedly said, England is a one-ship submarine massacre. Other ships in the task group started joking. Why bother searching? Just send England. The Japanese submarine force was so devastated by England's rampage that they abandoned their reconnaissance line entirely. The American invasion of the Marianas proceeded with complete surprise, because England had eliminated the Japanese submarine picket line single-handedly. USS Buckley, DE-51. This ship engaged in one of the most bizarre naval battles of the entire war. On May 6, 1944, Buckley detected U-66 on sonar and began a pursuit. After several hours of cat and mouse, Buckley's depth charges damaged U-66 badly enough that it was forced to surface. U-66's captain decided to fight it out on the surface. Both ships began firing at point-blank range. We're talking less than 100 yards separation. Buckley's 3-inch guns pounded the U-boat, but U-66's deck gun crew fought back desperately, scoring several hits on Buckley's superstructure. Then Buckley's captain, Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel, made a decision that sounds like something from a pirate movie. He rammed the submarine. Buckley's bow crashed into U-66's side, and for several minutes the two vessels were locked together, grinding against each other in the waves. German sailors tried to jump aboard Buckley to capture it. American sailors fired rifles and threw anything they could, wrenches, coffee cups, shell casings, at the Germans trying to board. It turned into actual hand-to-hand combat. Sailors fighting with knives, fists, and improvised clubs on the deck of a Destroyer Escort in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, Buckley's engines reversed and pulled the Destroyer Escort free. As the ships separated, Buckley's crew opened fire with everything, and U-66 sank within minutes. When Buckley returned to port, its bow was crumpled like a crushed beer can. But it had won one of the last boarding actions in U.S. Navy history. USS Samuel B. Roberts, D-413, known as the Destroyer Escort that fought like a battleship. During the Battle of Samar in October 1944, Roberts was part of a small escort group protecting American escort carriers when a massive Japanese fleet, including 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and multiple destroyers, appeared on the horizon. The American escort carriers were hopelessly outgunned. The only thing standing between them and the Japanese battleships were 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, including Samuel B. Roberts, the commander of the American destroyers. Knowing they couldn't win, decided to charge the Japanese fleet anyway to buy time for the carriers to escape. Samuel B. Roberts charged alongside the destroyers, its tiny 5-inch guns firing at Japanese battleships whose guns were literally 3 times larger. For over 2 hours, Roberts traded shots with ships that outweighed it by a factor of 10. It hit the heavy cruiser Chokai with a torpedo, causing flooding. Its guns scored hits on multiple Japanese vessels, causing confusion and forcing evasive maneuvers. The Japanese return fire was devastating. Shell after shell slammed into Roberts. The bridge was destroyed. The engine room was flooding. Fires raged throughout the ship, but Roberts kept fighting. Even as the ship was sinking, its crew continued firing until the ammunition was exhausted. When Roberts finally rolled over and sank, it had fired over 600 5-inch shells, more than most destroyers fired in multiple engagements. Of the 224 men aboard, 89 were killed, but the carriers escaped. The Battle of Samar was won because ships like Samuel B. Roberts sacrificed themselves. Admiral Clifton Sprague, commander of the carrier group, later said, "I have no words to describe the bravery of these men. They knew they were going to die and they attacked anyway." These weren't just ships. They were crewed by ordinary Americans. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college kids from California, who became extraordinary warriors when their country needed them. By war's end, the final accounting was clear. Destroyer escorts had sunk 68 German U-boats and 30 Japanese submarines, nearly 100 enemy submarines destroyed by a ship class that didn't even exist in 1941, but their real contribution was bigger than the kill count. They broke the U-boat blockade that was strangling Britain. They protected the convoys that kept the Soviet Union supplied. They screened the invasion fleets that liberated Europe and conquered the Pacific. Destroyer escorts were built. 84,000 American sailors served on them. They steamed over 100 million miles during the war, enough to circle the Earth 4,000 times. And they paid a price. 6 destroyer escorts were sunk by U-boats. 8 were sunk by Japanese forces. 1 was lost to a mine. Hundreds of sailors gave their lives, but they won. They won decisively. After the war, naval historians and strategists studied the Battle of the Atlantic extensively. The consensus was clear. Without destroyer escorts, the Allies might have lost the war. Britain would have been starved into submission. D-Day would have been impossible. The Soviet Union might have collapsed without American supplies. One ship class, cheap, unglamorous, built by the hundreds, changed the outcome of the entire Second World War. The German U-boats that once terrorized the Atlantic learned to fear them, and they were right to. Because when America unleashed the Destroyer Escorts, the hunters became the hunted, and the tide of war turned forever. Pause. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Next week, we'll be covering another incredible piece of World War II history: how one American submarine sank the largest warship ever built. Until then, remember, history isn't just about the famous battles and legendary generals. Sometimes it's about the ordinary ships and ordinary people who did extraordinary things.